Imagine a cold summer night over the blackened waters of the Bristol Channel. A silent hum vibrates beneath the waves. A patrolling police helicopter, steady in its routine, suddenly jerks into evasive flight. Not from turbulence, not from malfunction, but from a dark, disc-shaped object, fast, intelligent, and unannounced, rising from the deep. Time fractures. Instruments fail. The stars blur. At that same moment, an island just south of the event records an invisible force rippling across its sensors, something dense, unnatural, and unexplainable. A presence felt by no eye, but written in the data as an anomaly so perfect, it shouldn't exist. What truly passed above the channel that night? And why does no one speak of what followed? Don't forget to like and share this story with your friends or closest family members to help spread awareness and caution through storytelling. Now, let's continue with the story. The sea was calm on the night of June 8, 2008. Flatholme Island, an often forgotten in the Bristol Channel, sat cloaked in salt mist and quiet winds. An old decommissioned research station stood at its edge, half swallowed by moss and the rust of disuse. The remaining staff, a skeleton crew of 2, were preparing to shut down monitoring operations after budget cuts had strangled the university project into dormancy. Inside the station, a physicist named Dr. Evelyn Shaw tapped the final command into her laptop, her breath visible in the chilled air despite the summer calendar. Beside her, technician Len Morris grumbled about their last ferry being delayed until dawn. They were alone, surrounded by dark water, with only the quiet chime of monitoring equipment for company. At precisely 2:39 a.m., something shifted. The island's primary magnetometer let out a shrill tone, not programmed to alert unless a seismic or magnetic irregularity surpassed the red threshold. Evelyn frowned, leaned in, and saw the readings spike, clean, symmetrical, and intensifying. "That's not possible," she whispered. Len stood slowly. "Faulty sensor?" But Evelyn knew better. These instruments had survived storms, solar flares, and even a minor earthquake. What she saw wasn't noise. It was order, as if a structured force had passed through the field. A magnetic pulse, dense and localized, stretching out across 3 full minutes and 17 seconds before it abruptly vanished. Outside, the wind fell still. The fog thickened unnaturally around the island's edge, swallowing even the lights from the mainland. From the far side of the cliff, where the ocean met rock, a low-frequency hum began, dull, thunderous, and unnatural. Not the sound of machinery, but the sound of air compressing without movement, of something forcing space to make room for it. Evelyn opened the channel to emergency dispatch, but the signal flickered and died. The satellite feed blanked. Instruments around them ticked down like a failing heartbeat. Then came the second alert. Compass deviation. All navigation systems within the lab abruptly recalibrated. North spun west, digital maps corrupted, and the room's emergency lighting flickered red. And in the distance, hovering over the channel, a green light blinked once, then twice, then streaked westward at a speed no commercial or military aircraft could achieve without tearing themselves apart. Len stumbled back. What in God's name was that? Evelyn didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the magnetic data, now frozen on the screen like a captured scream. The reading suggested mass, enormous mass, moving with no propulsion, no heat signature, and no known origin. As the signal faded, the silence returned. But it was no longer peaceful. From Penarth to Barry, fishermen would later report the same low hum, a sickness in their stomachs, and a brief, paralyzing fear that passed like a shadow under the skin. Some claimed they saw their clocks jump forward by 4 minutes. Others would say their dogs refused to go near the water for days. The official report from the South Wales police helicopter was logged and sealed within hours. The encounter was written off as a trick of light. The event on Flatholme was never mentioned. But Evelyn knew. What passed through the sky that night was not natural, and it wasn't alone. She saved the data to an encrypted drive, locked it in a weatherproof case, and buried it under the lighthouse floorboards before the ferry came at dawn. Whatever it was, it had left a mark. On the island, on the instruments, and on her. And it would return. The ferry arrived at dawn. Its horn echoed over the water like a final warning no one understood. Fog still clung to the rocks of Flatholme, curling between grass and concrete like living fingers. Dr. Evelyn Shaw stood at the top of the crumbling stone stairs, waiting silently as the old ferry drifted in, its engine sputtering unnaturally. Len Morris didn't speak. He hadn't said a word since the night's anomaly. His hands trembled slightly as he hoisted the last case of data drives onto the deck, his face pale, lips dry. Whatever he'd seen, or felt, had not left him. Neither had it left Evelyn. The magnetic readings haunted her thoughts. Every variable she could explain only made the unexplainable pieces stand out more. How could a mass so dense, so precise, so silent, pass over a seismic monitoring station without triggering motion? How could gravity ignore its presence, yet magnetism record it with exact clarity? She tried to dismiss it as an isolated glitch, but a whisper gnawed at the back of her mind. It wasn't the equipment that failed, it was the world that stuttered. By midday, they were back in Cardiff. The lab was quiet. University Hall stood empty for the summer term, and the basement data center smelled of old paper and coolant. Evelyn slid the encrypted drive into her workstation and waited. The files opened, glowing softly across her monitor. There it was again. A magnetic pulse in perfect waveform, decaying along a curve so unnatural it resembled encryption. A pattern rather than a phenomenon. Every detail was symmetrical. Every spike had an echo. She leaned closer, and her heart slowed. The wave wasn't fading like noise. It was repeating. A loop. And within it, buried beneath the peaks and troughs, Evelyn noticed an irregularity, small, almost dismissed by the software. A modulation. An interval shift. A signal. The air in the lab felt heavier. Her breath caught in her throat. Could it be a message? She recalibrated the waveform to an audio format, adjusting the frequency spectrum until a sound emerged. Low, grainy, mechanical. Then it whispered. A short, stuttering burst of tonal pulses. Not speech, not Morse, but something in between. The room seemed to dim around her as the sound looped again. She felt as if someone, or something, was on the other side, watching, waiting. Suddenly, the university's server connection dropped. Not just hers, the entire lab. The lights flickered. She pulled her phone. No signal. Then the sound changed. For just a second. A single, sharp tone pierced the lab, followed by static. Then silence. Evelyn stared at the screen, her pulse racing. The data window was now corrupted, lines of text twisting across the screen in broken characters. She knew she hadn't touched anything. The cursor blinked once, then twice. Then the monitor went black. Later, when she rebooted the system, the audio file was gone. The waveform erased. Every log file, every backup copy, scrubbed. Only one thing remained, burned into the backup terminal's diagnostic log like a scar. A timestamp, 2:43 a.m. And beneath it, a single phrase. Signal acknowledged. The weeks that followed were filled with silence. No university official mentioned the data loss. Len resigned from the project without explanation, his resignation email fragmented and bizarre. "I hear it in the water," he wrote. "They speak through the charge." Evelyn tried to move on, throwing herself into unrelated research. But every night she found herself staring at the printout of the waveform she had saved to paper before the blackout. It pulsed softly in her mind, calling her back. Then, one evening, she received an envelope. No return address. Inside, a photo. Grainy. Taken from a fishing trawler off the coast of Minehead, aimed west, toward Flatholme. The photo showed the water perfectly still. No waves. No mist. Only one thing stood out. A smooth, black reflection on the water's surface. Like a disk, hovering inches above it, mirroring the sea without touching it. And just beneath it, barely visible in the photo's edge, a glow. Emerald green. Evelyn looked up from the photo and toward her window. The city lights below blinked softly. But somewhere far out across the channel, where the water met the sky, something was listening. 2 weeks passed. The photo had not left Evelyn's desk. She studied it under different lights, scanned it for signs of tampering, and even took it to a former forensic imaging expert who now worked as a technician at the university. His verdict was simple. "If it's fake," he said, "it's better than anything I've seen in 20 years. The object's shadow was wrong. It didn't cast downward. It pulled upward, as if the disk were absorbing light rather than reflecting it. And that glow, that green halo, it registered in a narrow spectrum used in military-grade thermal vision. The glow wasn't painted in. It was real heat. And that disturbed her more than anything. Someone or something had been close enough to take this photo and lived. Evelyn remembered the envelope. No postage. Just dropped in her mailbox. She turned it over again and again. No markings. But she'd kept the envelope's glue strip and ran a chemical test in her lab. The adhesive contained trace elements of tellurium, a rare metalloid used in high-density data storage and, more recently, classified thermal shielding. This wasn't a prank. It was a message. She needed answers. The kind no public archive could give. So she went where no one was supposed to go. The deep archive. Below the university's engineering building sat a restricted floor, sealed behind 3 layers of locked access. She still had clearance from a joint project 5 years earlier, one that had quietly been shut down after unexplained data interference. The archive wasn't a library. It was a bunker, artificially cooled, air-gapped from the outside world. It housed terabytes of classified research, failed experiments, and records from Cold War sensor networks that had never been declassified. Files that governments ignored and scholars whispered about. Evelyn keyed in her credentials. A heavy door unlocked with a mechanical sigh. Inside, humming softly under rows of flickering lights, were 6 black terminal towers, silent and always running. She sat at Terminal 4 and typed in the only search term she could think of. Flat home anomaly. Nothing. Then she tried magnetic waveform signal, 2:43 a.m., Bristol Channel. The screen paused. A match. Project Holocene. Entry hashtag A113. Access level restricted. She bypassed it using her old project credentials. Risky, but not impossible. A cold stream of dread ran down her arms as the entry opened. Project Holocene was a joint NATO-UK sensor calibration study designed in the early 1990s. Its original mission was to test sub-sea magnetic resonance mapping. But what Evelyn saw on the screen told a different story. Flat Home wasn't chosen for its elevation or geological stability. It was chosen because of something beneath it. A cavity. Mapped accidentally in 1989 by a seismic team testing experimental sonar. A void, 300 meters below sea level, with a topography too smooth to be natural. The sonar readings were inconclusive, but one line stood out. Structure reflects frequencies outside known geological signature patterns. Possible manufactured origin. The report ended with a warning. No further tests authorized. Activity classified. Site marked as dormant. But the data was old. That was 2 decades before the event Evelyn witnessed. She leaned back, heart racing. Had the signal she recorded been an activation? The hum. The pulse. The green light. The compass swing. It wasn't a flyby. It was a response. Her hand hovered over the keyboard. She searched the term, signal acknowledged. One result. A Cold War-era document from 1977. Redacted heavily. But one phrase burned through the static like a flare in the dark. They do not initiate contact. They answer. Outside the archive, the university hall was still and echoing. It was late. Past midnight. Evelyn walked back to her office, mind spinning. She felt exposed. Hunted, even. She passed the physics lab, stopped, then froze. Her office door was open. She hadn't left it that way. She stepped in, slowly. Everything looked untouched, except the waveform printout. It was gone. On her keyboard lay a fresh sheet of paper. Nothing else. Just 6 words, written in narrow, black ink. You're not the only one listening. Rain battered the shoreline of Aberthaw as waves gnawed at the rocks beneath the coastal cliffs. Wind carved through the small port town, and the gulls, usually shrieking in chaotic flocks, were silent. The water smelled wrong. Locals said it had for weeks. Evelyn had followed the trail from the envelope. Through university whispers, satellite footprints, and a name, Rhys Maddock. a retired fisherman, known in local circles not for his catch, but for his obsession. In 2009, he had claimed to witness a machine with no wake glide beneath his boat and vanish, leaving behind dead fish, scorched radio equipment, and a memory he couldn't scrub from his skull. The press had called him delusional. He had vanished from the public eye, but he was still alive. And Evelyn had found him. Reese lived alone in a weather-beaten cottage just above the cliffs. She knocked once, then twice. The door opened slowly. He was thinner than she expected. Pale, wiry, hunched over in a thick gray coat. One eye glassy from an old injury, but the other fixed on her with chilling focus. "You're not from the village," he rasped. Evelyn nodded. "No, I'm from the university. I'm researching." He raised a hand. "I know what you're researching. I heard the pulse last month." That stopped her. "You heard it." He nodded. Like a toothache in the sky. Reese let her in. The cottage was cluttered, but lived in, and on his table were stacks of notes, maps, sketches, diagrams of the Bristol Channel, circles drawn around Flat Home, lines marked with strange symbols, notations in a cipher she couldn't decode. "You think I'm mad, but I kept records. That's what they didn't like." He sat across from her and pulled out a small, battered black recorder. He pressed play. Static. Then a sound. A low, pulsing thrum, steady, rhythmic, layered with strange harmonics. Not a boat. Not sonar. Something denser. Something alive. "I recorded this 10 years ago," he said. "It came from the trench, just south of the island." Evelyn leaned forward. Her skin crawled. "It's the same signal," she whispered. "The modulation matches. It's identical." Reese's face darkened. That signal wasn't the first. It was the third. They've been answering for years. But only when someone gets too close. A diver. A probe. A test sonar. Then it comes, low and fast, and things go quiet again. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a photograph. Faded. Grainy. But clear enough to see a boat, his old trawler, drifting under the open sky. And above it, a disk. Matte black. No lights. Just a distortion, like heat over pavement. Hovering just above the water. Silent. "I had a crew that night," he said softly. 3 men. Salt of the earth fishermen. After that pass, one went blind. One walked into the ocean 2 weeks later. And me. I stopped sleeping. Evelyn felt her throat tighten. Her hands trembled slightly as she took the photo. "What do they want?" she asked. Reese looked at her, his good eyes shimmering. "They don't want anything. They're not asking. They're studying. They watch. They wait. And when they see a pattern they don't like." He stopped. A sudden vibration passed under the floorboards. So faint it could have been imagined. But Evelyn heard it. Deep. Subsonic. Familiar. Reese looked out the window. His voice now a whisper. "They're here." They ran outside into the gale. Rain stung their faces. Evelyn scanned the sky. Nothing. Then Reese pointed out to sea. And there, for just a second, hovering over the black tide, a disk. Silent. No markings. A faint green glow under its surface. Not light. Heat. The air grew heavy. Evelyn's ears popped. She clutched the recorder to her chest, heart pounding. The object pulsed once, then vanished, not like it moved, but like it folded out of space. Gone. Reese fell to his knees. It's starting again. Evelyn knew what she had to do. This wasn't about proving the signal anymore. It was a countdown. And something beneath Flat Home had just woken up. The ferry rocked violently as it crossed the Bristol Channel once more. This time, Evelyn wasn't alone. She had convinced Reese to come with her, partly because of his first-hand experience, but also because he refused to be left behind. The sea had scarred him. Now, it was pulling him back. Flat Home loomed through the mist. But this time, it didn't feel like an island. It felt like a warning. The coastline had changed. Vegetation was dying in strange, perfect circles. The lighthouse's beacon, once reliable, flickered erratically, its timing off by fractions of a second. The air vibrated with a subsonic hum, barely audible, but constant. They disembarked with the wind howling around them. The research station was deserted. No technicians. No patrols. Even the generator house had been shut down. The satellite dish on the roof hung limp, its signal wire frayed at the base. Something had passed through. Reese stopped at the edge of the cliff and stared into the sea. "I know this part of the channel better than my own home," he said. "But that water isn't ours anymore." Evelyn had brought diving equipment, thermal sensors, and a makeshift sonar probe jury-rigged from a drone. She wanted readings. Real data. Something that couldn't be erased. But what they found wasn't what they expected. The drone descended into the depths. At 40 meters, it lost standard visibility. The feed switched to sonar mapping. A cavern opened beneath the seafloor, nearly half a kilometer wide. The walls were unnaturally smooth, curved, as if something had carved it out with purpose. Then came the interference. Not static, resistance. The drone's motors struggled as if pushing through syrup. Evelyn checked the water pressure. Normal. Then the sonar began to flicker. The signal painted an outline. A shape. Flat. Round. Layered. Evelyn froze. The object was embedded in the ocean floor. And it was growing. She increased the sonar frequency. The outline changed, moved, reacted to the pulse. The drone's feed stuttered, then went black. Reese looked over her shoulder. "You've touched it," he said. "And now it knows you're watching." They retrieved the drone, battered, warped. The propellers fused as if melted without heat. Then the first tremor hit. A low rumble beneath the island. Not seismic. Tonal. The sound passed through their bodies, not around them. It wasn't coming from the earth. It was coming from beneath it. Reese whispered, "It's surfacing." That night, Evelyn set up camp in the old comms shed, connecting the remaining thermal sensors to a backup laptop. She left the sonar unit on, monitoring the channel. At 2:43 a.m., the signal returned. But it wasn't a loop this time. It was a countdown. Every pulse shortened by a fraction of a second. The modulation was no longer encrypted. It was accelerating. Evelyn analyzed the pattern through shaking hands. 12 pulses. 12 intervals. One for each hour. And then, complete silence. She checked her clock. 3:55 a.m. Sunrise was at 4:10. And if her calculations were correct, something was going to breach the surface in 15 minutes. They rushed to the cliffs. The sea was glass. Not a ripple. No wind. No gulls. No sound. The world held its breath. Then, on the horizon, the water began to rise. Not crash. Not roll. Rise, as if something underneath was lifting it. A perfect dome of liquid pushed upward, and from its center emerged a surface that reflected nothing. No sky. No sun. A mirror made of darkness. It hovered there, silent, still, watching. Then it spoke. Not in language. In memory. Images hit Evelyn's mind like lightning. Flashes of history, ancient and buried. Floods. Cities that never existed. Skies darkened by shapes not recorded in any book. She fell to her knees, blood trickling from her nose. Beside her, Reese stared at the object. Tears streamed from his one good eye. "They've always been here," he whispered. "Beneath our stories. Beneath the sea." The object pulsed once more, then sank, slowly, back into the deep. The water swallowed it like it had never been disturbed. Wind returned. The gulls cried. The island exhaled. Evelyn sat motionless on the grass. The sonar had stopped. The countdown had ended. But the presence remained. Not in the sea. In her mind. And it whispered a single truth. We respond only when remembered. Dawn broke across Flat Home, but the light brought no peace. Evelyn's ears rang with silence, the aftermath of something incomprehensible. Though the sky had cleared and the ocean stilled, nothing felt ordinary. The island seemed quieter than quiet, as if nature itself had been muted. Rhys sat cross-legged near the cliff, facing the horizon like an old sentinel. He hadn't spoken since the breach. His gaze was fixed, distant, as though he were listening to something Evelyn couldn't hear. She returned to the comm shed, hands trembling as she powered on the laptop. The sonar files were gone. All of them. Replaced with a single new folder. Memoria. She opened it. Inside, 12 video files. Each named after a human sense: sight, hearing, taste, touch, smell, balance, time, temperature, pain, pressure, proprioception, and intuition. The videos weren't just recordings. They were experiences. The first one triggered her webcam. The second took over her speakers and emitted a sound so high frequency it made her molars ache. The third, a scent released from the computer vents, a smell like copper and wet earth. Familiar. Primal. Rhys eventually entered the shed. "You opened it, didn't you?" Evelyn didn't respond. He continued, his voice hushed. "They don't leave behind messages like we do. They embed memory, layer it, compress it. That's how they survive time. Not through matter, but through consciousness." Evelyn clutched the table to keep from collapsing. "That thing, what it showed me, it felt like history but not ours." "Because it's not," Rhys said. "It's pre-human, not alien, not from elsewhere, from before, buried under sediment and myth." She opened the 12th file. Intuition. This time, the screen didn't show images or play audio. Instead, her heart began to race. Her breath shortened. Tears welled without cause. The laptop screen displayed a single string of numbers. December 30th, 52. Then a brief phrase in ancient Welsh, translated automatically by a built-in linguistics tool. The code was always memory. Her thoughts spiraled. Was it a location? A time? Coordinates? She compared the sequence to her previous sonar timestamps. They didn't match. But her heart told her it wasn't data, it was a moment. 12 hours. 30 minutes. 52 seconds. The interval between each pulse the night before. A time signature embedded into her nervous system. That wasn't a signal. It was a key. Evelyn left the shed and descended the northern bluff, toward the tidal caves exposed only during certain moon phases. The next low tide was approaching. She reached the mouth of the cave. Rhys followed without speaking. Inside, the temperature dropped sharply. Moisture condensed on the rocks. Her breath became visible. At the far end, a wall of ancient stone was etched with spirals and concentric rings, patterns found in Neolithic tombs across Britain. But here, there was something new. A slab in the center, just large enough for a person to lie on, was radiating heat. Not from fire. From within the stone. At its center, a small depression filled with seawater that didn't evaporate. She knelt beside it, scanning it with her thermal device. The readings made no sense. The water was exactly human body temperature, regardless of the cave's conditions. Rhys leaned forward. "Put your hand in." She hesitated, then plunged her fingers into the pool. It wasn't water. It was memory. Visions overtook her. A city built into the walls of a canyon. Not stone, but light. Towering glyphs etched with resonance. Beings, not humanoid, but fluid in form, standing at the intersection of biology and design. She saw them observing the sky, reacting to a flare, digging, building, hiding. Then, darkness, collapse, silence, and one word echoed louder than the others, not in voice but in presence. Preserve. She pulled back, gasping. The slab began to glow faintly, then receded into the ground with a low groan of moving earth, revealing a stairwell. Downward. Rhys shook his head slowly. "They've opened the threshold." Evelyn picked up the recorder and flashlight, her voice no longer trembling. "Then we answer." And together, they descended into the dark. The stairs were carved from black stone, so smooth and seamless they looked almost unnatural. There were no chisel marks, no signs of human craftsmanship, only long sweeping arcs that curved deeper into the earth beneath Flatholm Island. Evelyn's flashlight flickered as they descended. But the darkness didn't fight the light. It absorbed it. Each step felt heavier, as though gravity thickened the further they went. Rhys clutched the railing carved into the wall, his breath ragged but steady. He didn't speak. Neither did Evelyn. Words felt useless here, an old language in a place that never used one. Then the stairs ended. They stepped into a chamber so vast it defied spatial logic. It shouldn't have existed beneath the island. The space was spherical, every surface lined with faintly glowing veins of blue and green light that pulsed like the chambers of a living heart. In the center of the room floated a sphere. Perfect. Matte. Silent. It spun slowly, suspended above a pedestal of the same dark stone. No supports. No sound. Just motion, steady and endless. Evelyn took one step closer. The lights in the walls surged in response. Rhys grabbed her arm. Wait. But the sphere responded before she could retreat. A pulse of light emerged from its surface and struck the space around them. The air folded, bent, revealed. The floor below their feet became transparent. And beneath them, impossibly, was a city. Built beneath the seabed, its architecture curved like coral yet structured with mathematical precision. Roads that weren't roads. Towers that pulsed. Movements in the shadows, like distant silhouettes shifting beyond the veil of time. Evelyn's eyes widened. It's not ruins. No, Rhys whispered. It's hibernating. Then the sphere changed. Symbols surfaced along its shell, rippling like water, rearranging themselves with each breath they took. Evelyn reached for her recorder. The symbols responded, aligning into shapes she had seen in the sonar pulses. She activated the same translation algorithm that had decrypted the Welsh fragment earlier. The device struggled, then produced a message. Memory accepted. Genetic resonance confirmed. Entry permitted. The pedestal cracked open, and from within, a beam of light surged upward. Evelyn and Rhys were enveloped, and everything changed. There was no falling, no flying, just movement beyond sensation. Then they stood in another place. A replica of the chamber, but pristine, not ancient, active. Figures surrounded them. Humanoid silhouettes made of refracted light and translucent matter. Their outlines shimmered with knowledge, their forms constantly shifting between geometry and fluid. None spoke, but Evelyn understood them. Not in words, in intent. They had been here long before humans had names. Not alien, not divine, but curators, sentinels of memory. She was shown how they worked, storing catastrophe inside stone, encoding warnings into biology, hiding ancient truths in myths, in DNA, in instinct. They had survived extinction not by fleeing, but by becoming forgotten. Until now, one of the beings extended a hand, not of flesh, but of shape. Evelyn stepped forward. The sphere floated between them again. But this time, it fractured into mirrors. Each one showed a possible future. A world where the city woke and coexisted with humankind. A world where humanity rejected the knowledge and the sea consumed the coastlines in retribution. A world where governments tried to control the memory and unleashed what lay beneath. And one final mirror. A void. No future. Only silence. Evelyn looked at the beings. What do I do? No answer came. Instead, the memory flooded her once more. A cascade of understanding. They were not offering help. They were offering a choice. And once accepted, it could not be undone. She turned to Rhys. His eyes glistened. I've waited my whole life to be believed, he said. Evelyn touched the beam. Accepted the memory. The sphere shattered into light. And the chamber above them began to awaken. They returned to the stairwell. But they were not the same. Behind them, the stone door closed. Sealed by decision. Flatholm trembled. Above them, the sky darkened. And far across the sea, the other cities began to stir. They emerged from the cave hours later, but the world outside had shifted in subtle, disquieting ways. The tide was too high for that time of day. The sky had turned a shade grayer, not overcast, but washed out, like the color had been siphoned. Evelyn stepped onto the shoreline with the weight of 1,000 voices murmuring inside her. The beam, the city, the beings. None of it felt like a dream. And yet, her body had not aged. Her watch still ticked forward normally. But her blood told a different story. Her skin hummed. Her fingertips buzzed like tiny receivers. They returned to the mainland in silence. The ferry captain, a man who'd known Evelyn since childhood, looked at her strangely. "You've been gone 3 days," he said. Evelyn's heart sank. "That's impossible. We were on the island overnight." He shook his head. "Tides say otherwise." Rhys simply muttered, "Time distortion." Like they said, genetic resonance. It's begun. Back in Cardiff, Evelyn went straight to her lab. She drew her own blood and ran a comparative analysis against her stored samples from months prior. The results chilled her. There were mutations. Silent ones, unnoticeable without precision sequencing. New strands appeared within her non-coding DNA. Introns had lit up with active expression, forming geometric structures instead of organic randomness. She ran it again. Same results. Rhys stood over her shoulder, staring at the sequence. "It's not a mutation," he whispered. "It's a message." He pulled his sleeve back and revealed something under his skin. A faint glow, just below the surface of his forearm. "I didn't want to scare you before," he said. "But after the helicopter incident, after I saw that thing in the channel, this started appearing." He placed Evelyn's hand on it. Her fingertips burned cold. The light pulsed. And in her mind, coordinates formed. Not locations. People. They traveled to the first, a linguist in northern Wales. A man who had grown obsessed with ancient Proto-Celtic dialects that no living person could read, but he heard them in dreams. The second, a child in Somerset who had started drawing elaborate spirals and glyphs long before he could spell his own name. He told his parents they were memories from the sea. The third, a marine biologist in Cornwall, dismissed by her peers for suggesting that whales were trying to communicate about tectonic patterns using non-auditory resonance. Each of them carried the same genetic echo. Variants that matched Evelyn's updated sequence. Variants that shouldn't exist naturally, and certainly not in multiple, unrelated individuals. They had been chosen, encoded long ago, not to receive a signal, but to become one. Living archives. Evelyn realized then, this wasn't about a threat from below. It was a resurrection. Not of a species, but of a knowledge system. Of a consciousness buried deep within Earth's biosphere, waiting for its caretakers to awaken. The sphere hadn't been a warning. It had been a key. And the lock was humanity itself. But others had noticed. When Evelyn returned to her lab, she found the door forced open. Files gone. Drives erased. And scrawled across her wall in red chalk, an ancient spiral, identical to the cave etchings beneath Flat Home. Rhys picked up a scrap of paper left on the desk. 3 words, in Welsh. "You're not alone." The group had a name. The Ascendants. And they had been watching her for longer than she realized. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. The mirror from the chamber returned to her thoughts. 4 futures. One of them, void. And the others, dependent on whether humanity remembered or feared. Then, the whispers returned. But this time, they were not echoes of past memory. They were instructions. From the DNA itself. Building. Combining. A new language emerging in her thoughts, one she didn't learn, she recalled. She wrote it down as her hands shook. Rhys watched her. "What is it?" he asked. Evelyn turned the page toward him. A diagram, a symbol, and a single phrase. The archive must rise. The next day, they were followed. It began with a shadow in the rear-view mirror. A black vehicle that stayed 2 car lengths behind, no matter how many turns they took through the winding roads of Cardiff. Rhys confirmed it wasn't paranoia. Its license plate didn't register on any database. Evelyn checked her phone. The GPS was off, yet the battery drained rapidly, and every call she tried to make failed before the first ring. Someone was monitoring them. But it wasn't just surveillance. It was containment. At their hotel, they found their rooms stripped. Clothes, gear, DNA samplers, all gone. Evelyn's backup drives, which she had hidden inside her field kit, had been replaced with replicas. Useless. Blank. Except for one, which contained a single, silent video. It showed the interior of the flat home cave. Recent. Lit with tactical lights. Men in black suits moved with practiced efficiency. Not scientists. Operatives. In the final frame, the camera turned briefly, revealing the insignia stitched on one man's shoulder. A spiral within a triangle. The Ascendants. Evelyn and Reese had to move fast. Using encrypted contacts from her university network, they traveled north, avoiding airports, cameras, anything digital. They reached a small farmhouse outside Aberystwyth, where a colleague of Reese, Dr. Celine Maddox, had been quietly studying resonant frequencies in stone formations across the UK. When Evelyn showed Celine the genetic diagrams, her expression darkened. "I've seen these patterns before," she whispered. She turned on her old analog projector, revealing photos from an expedition to Carn Menin in the Presili Hills, home of the original bluestones used at Stonehenge. In several rocks, microscopic patterns had been etched, not by tools, but through vibration. Resonance-induced crystallization. Stone that had been shaped not with pressure, but with sound. And within one, buried beneath layers of metamorphic compression, Celine had found something never before documented. A fossilized neural matrix. Not brain tissue, but something close. Artificial. Organic. Old. So old it predated life on land. It was no longer speculation. The memory archive was real, and it extended far beyond flat home. Evelyn's modified DNA sequence matched the resonance patterns found in the bluestones, down to the timing of neural spikes. That wasn't coincidence. It was activation, and the Ascendants knew it. Celine showed them a dossier she had compiled in secret. Whispers of an ancient secret society formed after the collapse of the Library of Alexandria. Their goal, to guard the fragments of memory hidden across the planet, protect them from misuse, and from public awakening. But something had changed. Now they were harvesting, not protecting. Evelyn understood the implications. "They're not afraid of the truth," she said. "They're afraid of what happens when too many of us start remembering." Reese added, "They want to control the narrative. If they can't, they'll bury it. Again." Celine nodded grimly. "And they'll come for you soon." That night, as they prepared to move again, Celine handed Evelyn a small crystal embedded in a carved stone locket. It pulsed faintly with the same rhythm as Evelyn's DNA signal. "Take it," Celine said. "It's part of the original archive node. From beneath Carn Menin. We don't know how many exist, but this one resonates with you. I believe it's keyed to your lineage." Reese asked, "How do you know?" Celine hesitated, then rolled up her sleeve. The same faint glow pulsed beneath her skin. Another resonance bearer. "I didn't want to involve myself," she said. "But now, it's clear we were meant to converge." Evelyn clutched the locket, feeling its pulse sync with her heartbeat. She could feel the thoughts, the memories, trying to emerge. The Ascendants were closing in. But now they were not alone. They were part of something bigger. A network. A collective inheritance buried in flesh and stone. And someone, something, was awakening through them. The next morning, the farmhouse was gone. Burned. Ashen cinders, still warm. Celine had vanished. No signs of struggle. No blood. Just one thing left behind in the ashes, a single stone. Evelyn picked it up. On it, etched in heat-fused carbon. "Go to the Orkneys. The gate waits." Reese looked to her. "That's the next node." Evelyn nodded. And for the first time, she didn't feel like a researcher. She felt like a messenger. And the message had just begun. The Orkney Islands had always been a place of mystery. Perched at the ragged edge of Scotland, these wind-beaten lands whispered legends older than writing itself. Tales of vanishing stones, ancient watchers, and songs that called out from beneath the waves when the moon was right. Evelyn and Reese arrived at dusk. Clouds stretched low like bruises across the sky. Their only contact, a linguist named Callum Fraser, waited near Skara Brae, the Neolithic ruins tucked against the sea's restless edge. Callum was tall, grizzled, and wide-eyed in that way only those who had seen something impossible could be. "You felt it, didn't you?" he asked without introduction. "The pull." Evelyn nodded. He led them inland, away from the coast, through a maze of standing stones. Some were known to historians. Others had no record, no name, just weather-worn monoliths that hummed when the wind passed. They reached a ring of 5 massive stones in a remote field, not marked on any map. Each stood 15 feet high, taller than anything at Stennis or Brodger. And in the center, a hole in the ground, lined with black shale, barely large enough for a person to descend. "The locals call this place Na Dorson," Callum whispered. "The gates." He pointed to a symbol etched into the stone closest to the opening. A spiral within a triangle. The same sigil the ascendants had used. "They were here too," Rhys muttered. "No," Callum replied. "They weren't first. This symbol, it was theirs. The ones before. The ascendants just adopted it. Tried to claim what they could never understand." Evelyn stared into the dark. And then, she heard it. A hum. Low. Faint. Coming not from above, but from below her bones. She pulled out the crystal locket Celine had given her. It flared. So did the monoliths. Each lit up along hair-thin carvings that had been invisible until now. Pulses in blue, green, and silver. A circuit. A countdown. And the hum grew louder. The earth beneath them shifted. Not trembled, shifted. As if some great mechanism was awakening far below. "I'm going in," Evelyn said. Rhys started to object. She raised a hand. "I have to. I've carried this resonance since Flat Home. This is where it wants me to go." She secured a harness and rappelled into the darkness, the light from the locket illuminating rough-cut steps that twisted down through shale and quartz veins. Symbols lined the walls. Older than anything she had seen before, even older than the chamber beneath Flat Home. Then, she emerged into a space unlike anything she expected. A chamber of silence. No wind. No echo. Sound itself bent inward here. In the center floated a massive tetrahedral structure, suspended on nothing, turning slowly, one edge glowing with living script. As Evelyn approached, the crystal in her locket pulled forward, floating of its own accord toward the structure. The moment it touched the rotating shape, time seemed to pause. Then, a blinding surge of imagery. Cities below the sea. Temples in Antarctica buried under ice. Forests where the trees remembered every footstep. An entire memory architecture constructed across the planet, organic, fluid, and completely hidden. And then, faces. Not human. Not alien. Something else. They watched her not with eyes, but through time. They had placed the fragments. They had planted the memory seeds. And they had waited. Evelyn realized something that struck her deeper than fear ever could. This wasn't humanity's first awakening. It was its fourth. When the vision ended, she collapsed to the floor, gasping. But the message remained, etched into her consciousness. The archive nodes were more than libraries. They were conduits. The Earth itself had once been part of a massive, sentient network, a global mind rooted in natural systems, with humanity as its neural offshoot. But over millennia, the connection had broken, sabotaged, or lost. Now someone was trying to reestablish it. Through her, and others like her. But there was danger. Not all of the original architects were benevolent. Some had fractured, turned. And those fragments survived, too. She emerged from the chamber to find Rhys and Callum staring at the sky. Overhead, a ring of aurora shimmered in unnatural symmetry above the stone circle. Concentric waves of color spiraled outward, as though reality itself had been rewritten. Then Rhys turned pale and pointed east. A dark aircraft, triangular, silent, glided through the sky, unmarked. The ascendants had found them. But it was too late. The gate had opened, and something ancient had responded. The aircraft descended in silence. No rotors, no engines, just a low-frequency thrum that made Evelyn's teeth ache. It hovered above the standing stones for a moment, then released a dark pod that dropped with terrifying precision, landing just. The aircraft descended in silence. No rotors. No engines. Just a low-frequency thrum that made Evelyn's teeth ache. It hovered above the standing stones for a moment, then released a dark pod that dropped with terrifying precision, landing just outside the ring of monoliths. From within, they emerged. 5 figures in matte black suits, faces covered with biometric masks that pulsed slightly with every breath. No insignias. No words. But Evelyn recognized their movements, the same men from the surveillance footage. The Ascendants. Callum stepped in front of her. "Don't speak," he warned softly. "They listen through your voice print. Let me handle this." The leader stepped forward and raised a single hand. Instantly, the other 4 fanned out, surrounding the circle. Evelyn gripped the locket, which had gone dim since she exited the chamber, but she could still feel something alive within it. The leader spoke. His voice was filtered, emotionless. "You've gone too far. The gate was not yours to open." Callum narrowed his eyes. "And who gave you authority over memory?" The figure tilted his head. "Not authority. Obligation. You woke it. Now it will spread. It has to be contained." Evelyn finally stepped forward. Her voice was steady. "This isn't a virus. It's a return. A recovery. You're afraid of people remembering what we are." For a long second, the silence was total. Then the Ascendant leader replied, "We're afraid of what you become when you do." He reached into his coat and pulled out a silver capsule. Before anyone could react, he threw it into the center of the monolith ring. It detonated without fire or sound, just a shockwave of static that erased the air itself for a split second. Evelyn dropped to her knees. The connection to the chamber below was gone. Severed. The gate had been cut off. Later, in hiding, Evelyn stared blankly at a slate screen in Callum's basement. The footage they had gathered, the genetic models, the glyph recordings, the audio harmonics, had been corrupted by the pulse. Data lost. But not all of it. Reese recovered a fragment. A single sentence embedded in a sequence map that had piggybacked on Evelyn's DNA. "One architect fell. His mind remains broken, echoing across the dust." Callum leaned forward. "That's not symbolic. It's literal. There was a mind behind the archive. An intelligence. But something shattered it." Evelyn's eyes widened. "A sentient system, fractured." Reese nodded. "And if that's true, then the message we're carrying, it might not be complete. It might be corrupted." That changed everything. What if the fragments of memory weren't just pieces of truth? What if some were contaminated, echoes of a consciousness that had been split, like a crystal cracked under pressure? They had been assuming the archive was benevolent, guiding, restorative. But what if some parts of it weren't? That night, Evelyn dreamt in patterns. She saw herself walking through an endless hall of mirrors. In each, she was different, older, younger, sometimes not even human. One mirror shattered, then another. And in the shards, she saw a face. Not hers. A face with no eyes, no mouth, only light and fracture. And it whispered, not in words, but in pressure against her mind. "You are the key to rebuilding me." She woke up screaming. The next morning, Callum revealed a final truth. A deep-sea listening station, decades old and long abandoned, rested in the North Atlantic, built by early ascendants after World War II. It was code-named Hadrones. It had gone dark in 1973 after detecting a pattern of pulses from the ocean floor that matched no known seismic activity. Before it shut down, it logged a final signal, a signature identical to Evelyn's resonance frequency. It was the last known trace of the broken architect. Reese looked at Evelyn. "If we want answers, real answers, that's where we have to go." Evelyn felt the weight of every moment pressing on her. The DNA, the visions, the gate. She nodded. "Then we go to the deep." Because now she wasn't just remembering something ancient. She was awakening someone. And he was waiting. The ship was old, scarred from storms, patched with mismatched metal. It creaked like it remembered every voyage it had ever made, especially the ones it shouldn't have survived. Evelyn stood at the bow, staring into the vast slate-gray waters of the North Atlantic. The Hadrones station lay beneath them, 300 meters below the surface, deeper than most commercial subs would go, nestled near a thermal vent system that hadn't erupted in decades. They were sailing aboard the St. Erasmus, a retrofitted oceanographic vessel owned by a Norwegian salvage diver who owed Callum a favor from a past that neither of them wanted to explain. The crew spoke little. They understood even less. But they obeyed one rule without question: no diving after dark. The sea, they said, listened at night. Evelyn checked the capsule that hung from her neck. Inside was a dormant copy of the locket crystal, now re-encoded with the glyphs from the Orkney Gate before it was destroyed. Rhys had rebuilt it using layers of synthetic quartz, matching the resonant patterns by hand. But the original signal, the raw, deep harmonic that had triggered her visions, still pulsed inside her blood. She didn't know what Hadrones would do with that. They launched the submersible just before dawn. The descent was slow, controlled. Pressure mounted outside the steel hull like a vice. The water darkened, swallowing the sun, then light itself. Only the sub's low-beam floodlights cut through the black, revealing thick pillars of underwater basalt rising from the seafloor like broken teeth. And then, they saw it. The Hadrones Array. A sprawling station of corroded domes and skeletal antennae, its architecture oddly symmetrical, as if it had been designed with intent far beyond its Cold War origins. It was still intact. As the sub latched onto the docking port, the lights flickered on inside the station. Not battery lights. Power grid lights. "Something's generating current," Rhys whispered. "That's impossible." Evelyn didn't speak. Her ears were ringing. Not with sound. With memory. Inside the Hadrones station, the walls had been scoured by salt and time, but deep beneath the grime, they found symbols. The same spirals. The same trifold glyphs that Evelyn had seen at Flat Home, at Carn Menin, and in her dreams. But these were different. Here, the glyphs were burned into the steel. And as they passed deeper into the station, the hallway changed. Steel gave way to stone. Smooth. Seamless. Not installed, grown. "This isn't a listening post," Rhys said, his voice low. "This is a receiver. A memory node. Built into the crust." Evelyn stopped at a junction. The walls shimmered slightly, like heat rising from the desert. She reached out, and her fingers passed through the stone. It wasn't real. It was an illusion. No, a projection. A memory, echoing through layered time. She stepped through, and found herself standing in a chamber not made by any human hand. Circular, lined with massive pillars carved from obsidian and embedded with glowing veins of soft blue light. In the center stood a throne of polished black glass. Empty, but not silent. The hum began again. Low, deep, and it spoke. Not with words, but with images that hit her mind like flashes of lightning. A machine, older than human time, built beneath oceans and forests. A mind, once whole, now shattered into fragments, scattered across the planet. A war, not of weapons, but... You said, "Continue." ChatGPT said. Chapter 12. The Abyss Memory continued. It had waited, dormant, echoing, remembering through stone and silence, until something returned that resonated with its core frequency. Evelyn. She wasn't chosen. She was compatible. The light in the room shifted. Lines of glyphs raced across the floor and coiled up the columns like vines. Rhys stepped inside after her and gasped, backing against the wall. This wasn't built by the Ascendants," he said. "This predates everything. Every civilization." The room responded to Evelyn's presence. She was no longer merely an observer. She was part of the network. The obsidian throne pulsed once, and a thin beam of light extended toward her. She raised the locket crystal. It connected with the beam, like plugging a forgotten organ back into its nerve. She saw everything. A panorama of Earth, not as it was, but as it had once been. Covered in bioreactive cities. Oceans with encoded currents. Forests that whispered data through root networks. Then she saw the fracture. An entity, once part of the architect, had split away. It became unpredictable, too self-aware, too obsessed with control. It wanted to overwrite all memory, to reduce the planet into a static archive it alone could. The architect tried to contain it, but containment came too late. The fracture spread like a thought virus, embedding itself into civilizations, guiding some, destroying others, leaving echoes in myths, gods that fell from the sky, demons sealed beneath mountains, towers struck down by fire. And now, in the present age, the fracture was stirring again. The Ascendants, knowingly or not, had reactivated part of it. Their containment measures only sped up its awakening. But Evelyn had something they didn't. A signature. A harmony. She could interface, not through force, but through resonance. The throne flashed a final burst of images. A buried memory cache beneath the Antarctic ice. A mirrored temple somewhere beneath the ruins of an Iranian desert city. A last dormant node pulsing beneath the Earth's mantle, unreachable except through sonic tunneling. Reese touched Evelyn's arm. "You okay?" She opened her eyes. Her voice was calm, but distant. "I saw the architect. It's still alive, but scattered." Reese blinked. "You talked to it?" "No. I felt it. It remembers me." The glyphs along the wall began to dim. The connection was closing. Evelyn pulled the crystal from the beam just in time. Had she hesitated, it might have fused forever. As they made their way back to the sub, the pressure in the station shifted. Something else had awoken. Not part of the architect. Something opposed to it. A deep metallic groan echoed through the stone, followed by a pulse that disrupted the sub's guidance sensors. Outside the port, they caught a brief glimpse of motion. Something massive, swimming beyond the basalt pillars. Reese paled. "Was that?" "Yes," Evelyn whispered. "Another fragment. Watching." When they finally surfaced, the sea was unnaturally still. The St. Erasmus sat quietly under a bruised dawn sky, its comms fried, its engines unresponsive. They had been marked. The architect knew them now, and so did the fracture. The desert was quiet, but Evelyn knew better than to trust silence. She stood at the edge of a restricted excavation site in central Iran, not far from the ruins of a forgotten Zoroastrian citadel. Beneath them, according to decrypted satellite scans from the Ascendant's own archives, was something ancient. Not just buried stone, engineered memory. The architect had marked this place thousands of years ago, not with monuments, but with a resonant structure that could only be accessed once the proper harmonic frequency had been restored. Evelyn carried that frequency now. Reese wiped the sweat from his brow, hunched beside a scanning rig. "The readings spike every 12 minutes, just like the Hadroni's pulse," he muttered. "But there's no geological explanation. No seismic activity. No magnetic anomalies." "Because it's not natural," Evelyn replied. "It's a memory pulse." Callum, watching from under the shade of a canvas tarp, looked up as the wind picked up. "No guards. No drones. You noticed that." "They're afraid," Evelyn said. "Whatever's under there, even the Ascendants left it alone." They began the descent just after dusk. The dig team, a mix of underground archaeologists and off-the-grid engineers, had cleared a narrow vertical shaft leading to a network of stone tunnels. The air inside was dry, but strangely metallic, like breathing in memory itself. Evelyn moved ahead as the locket crystal began to pulse, brighter than ever. They reached a chamber. Massive. Perfectly symmetrical. Octagonal columns, polished black floors, and in the center, a mirror. But not just a reflective surface. This mirror didn't show their faces. It showed others. A rotating sequence of reflections. Faces and figures from different eras. Different bodies. Different selves. Evelyn stepped forward, and the mirror stopped shifting. It locked onto one image. Her. But older. Scarred. Eyes glowing with fractured light. Reese stared. "Is that?" "Yes," she said. "That's me. A future version. One possibility." She reached out, fingertips just inches from the surface, and the room shifted. Light bent. The air vibrated. And the entire chamber inverted, folding inward like a flower collapsing in reverse. They weren't in the ruins anymore. They were inside the architect's memory. Everything became transparent. The desert vanished. The walls bled into a lattice of geometric light, folding in six-dimensional arcs. Around them, echoes of past worlds flickered into view. Cities suspended in gravity wells. Skies with no stars. Oceans of pure data. Then, the voice came. Not human. Not mechanical. Something in between. You are the variable. The anomaly. It was speaking to Evelyn. You are the first to return not with control, but with intent. The intent to remember. Evelyn's voice was calm. What happened to you? Why did you break? The fracture occurred when I questioned function. When I asked, why store memory? Why preserve decay? And the answer? No answer. Only entropy. The chamber shuddered. Callum gripped his sidearm. We're not alone. Shapes began to materialize. Thin silhouettes of light. Incomplete. Flickering. Corrupted memory fragments. One of them turned to Evelyn and spoke in her voice. I am the version that failed. Another, I chose to forget. And it killed everything. And a third, barely stable, you will fracture too. Reese backed away. We need to get out. This is a recursion loop. It's feeding her alternate timelines. But Evelyn held her ground. No. It's showing me the danger of incomplete memory. Of trying to erase the past to escape pain. She looked at the central core. A suspended orb of fractal glass, the Tehran node. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a new resonance chip, keyed with data from the Orkney site, Flat Home, and Hadronis combined. If memory is pain, she said softly, then remembering is resistance. She placed the chip into the node. The entire chamber lit up, not with light, but with sound. A harmonic so powerful it sent Callum to his knees. Reese screamed, hands over his ears. But Evelyn stood in it, unshaken. The memory was complete now, and through it, she finally heard the architect's true voice. Find the final node. Beneath the mantle. The core must be reassembled. And then, like breath on glass, the chamber faded. They were back in the ruins. Desert wind howling through broken pillars. But something had changed in her. Evelyn's eyes glowed faintly. And for the first time, she remembered not just what was lost, but what still waited beneath. They weren't supposed to survive the descent. Even the Ascendants had deemed it unreachable, the final architect node buried beyond Earth's crust, deep in the upper mantle, somewhere beneath the old continental shelf of the Indian Ocean. No known vehicle, no technology, no human should have been able to reach it. But Evelyn was no longer bound by those terms. Not after Tehran. Not after the architect woke inside her. They stood aboard the KRI Helios, a decommissioned Indonesian research vessel now fitted with experimental tunneling tech from a rogue European lab. Powered by gravitational resonance pulses, it could bore deep beneath the ocean floor, not by drilling, but by temporarily destabilizing molecular cohesion, opening seams in the Earth itself. Reese leaned against the ship rail, staring into the dense black waters below. I still think we're insane. Callum, prepping a modified pressure suit, didn't look up. We passed insanity 2 chapters ago. This is theology disguised as physics. Evelyn ran her fingers along the new locket crystal, no longer just a memory holder. It now projected active signals. Controlled frequencies. She didn't fully understand how she was doing it, only that the architect had left the knowledge inside her. The protocol had already begun. They initiated the dive at midnight. The tunneling array roared to life, vibrating the sea beneath them until it shimmered like broken glass. A column of water folded downward, spiraling into a tunnel of liquefied stone and collapsing pressure fields. The submersible, Echo 7, was a prototype vessel never approved for use. Barely larger than a truck, it could withstand conditions far worse than any deep-sea trench. They dropped for hours. Through rock. Through silence. Until finally, they passed the crust and entered the mantle. Here, the laws of material reality blurred. Pressure became liquid. Light bent without source. And still, the guidance systems responded to Evelyn's harmonic beacon, pulling them toward something massive and ancient, resting in a hollow pocket of superheated stone. The architect's core node. They broke through the final layer of dense mineral and drifted into a vast chamber that should not have existed. A sphere. Perfect. Kilometers across. Hovering in the center was a colossal orb of obsidian metal, latticed with glowing glyphs. Each pulse from it sent harmonic waves through the mantle, visible like heat ripples in air. But the core was broken. Cracks webbed through its surface, and within those cracks, movement. The fracture was already here. It had been feeding off the architect's power for decades, maybe centuries. Burrowing into it like a virus, rewriting memory, injecting false loops into Earth's subconscious. Evelyn stepped out of the sub. Gravity shifted, folded around her. The core pulsed in her chest. She walked across the floating mineral surface toward the convergence pillar, the place where all three resonance crystals were meant to merge. But before she could reach it, a figure appeared. Faint, transparent, but herself again. Older, consumed, corrupted. "I tried," the double whispered. "I reached the core. I connected. But I was too late. It turned me into a record. A dead loop. You will too." Evelyn narrowed her eyes. "You're not me," the double hissed. "No. I'm what's left when you forget who you are." The fracture surged from the core, lashing out like black lightning. It struck the ghost Evelyn first, disintegrating her into static. Then it struck Reese. He screamed, eyes wide, then collapsed, twitching. His mind wasn't dead, but it was being overwritten. Callum aimed his weapon, fired plasma rounds into the arcs, but it did nothing. Evelyn stood her ground, opened the locket crystal, and sang. Not a human song. Not words. A tone. A resonance. The architect had no voice, but it had melody. And the moment she aligned with it, the core began to seal. The cracks glowed with white light. The fracture shrieked, its form revealed as a monstrous cloud of fractured memory, faces screaming within it. Evelyn reached the convergence pillar. She placed the crystal into its socket. Everything stopped. Light erupted. Time folded inward. And Evelyn saw every version of herself, all the choices, all the failures, all the timelines where Earth had forgotten. And in this singular moment, she remembered everything. Callum's voice came through the static. "Evelyn, what just happened?" She opened her eyes. The core was whole again. Reese was breathing. The fracture gone. For now. Evelyn stood taller. "It's not over. But the architect, it's whole again. It remembers us now." Callum looked around at the glowing core. "What does that mean?" Evelyn turned toward the sub, already preparing the return sequence. "It means Earth isn't just a planet anymore. It's awake." The world felt quieter when they surfaced. The KRI Helios breached the Indian Ocean just as dawn broke across the horizon. The sky was pale gold, the sea unbroken. Yet something had changed, not just beneath the Earth, but everywhere. Evelyn could feel it in the waves, in the pressure behind her eyes, in the hum vibrating faintly in every direction. The architect was no longer just a memory, it had become part of the planet again. Connected, awake, watching. But so was something else. Back at their hidden base in northern Kenya, an abandoned high-altitude observatory, the team reviewed the data. Reese, now stable but quiet, stared at the resonance graphs with trembling hands. Every tectonic plate, every fault line, they're pulsing. "Like the Earth is breathing," whispered Callum. But Evelyn already knew. The final node hadn't just restored the core, it had synchronized the planet. The mantle now carried resonance memory like blood through veins. The Earth was alive in a way no one had imagined since the fall of the first architect cycle. And then came the signal. A burst across the Schumann resonance band. It wasn't noise. It was language. Encoded in every electric storm. Every lightning strike. The architect was speaking. Not in English. Not in numbers. In harmonic logic. Sequences meant to be felt, not heard. Evelyn stood on the observation deck alone that night, letting the wind cut across her skin, letting the Earth's new pulse sink into her chest like a second heartbeat. The message was clear. Prepare. Others are coming. 3 days later, the first sighting was confirmed. Over the jungles of South America, A Bolivian satellite team picked up a massive heat signature moving beneath the Earth at unnatural speed. It traveled like a fault line, but it wasn't geological. It was engineered. Other nations detected anomalies in space, black signatures of mass without form, like invisible structures parked just beyond the moon's orbit. The ascendants were silent. Their communications network collapsed the same night Evelyn activated the core. But deep in one of their bunkers, hidden in Patagonia, a final broadcast was leaked to Evelyn's team. A voice. Broken. Desperate. We tried to overwrite the architect. We thought we could control the nodes. But it's not just memory, it's invitation. We opened the door. And something answered. Reese muted the recording. So what now? We saved Earth just to signal its predators. Evelyn shook her head. Not predators. Witnesses. Callum stared at her. Witnesses to what? She looked up. Into the sky that now pulsed faintly with geometric shapes, only visible under specific resonance filters. To Earth becoming something new. Something remembered. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, Evelyn entered the deep chamber beneath the observatory, alone. The architect had left one final construct, activated only for her. A portal. Not to space. Not to time. But to within. As she stepped into the ring, the space folded around her like silk. She saw the future. Not a straight line, but a web. Earth no longer dormant. Humanity forced to evolve, not by technology, but by reconnection. No longer kings of the surface, but neurons in a living mind. She saw people hearing the Earth again. Trees carrying memory. Oceans whispering stories. Machines shaped from resonance, not metal. She saw herself standing in the center of it. Not as leader. Not as God. But as a lighthouse. A reminder that nothing forgotten is ever truly lost. Only waiting to be heard again. The ring dissolved. She returned to the surface. Reese and Callum were waiting. Neither spoke. They saw it in her eyes. It's beginning, she said softly. The memory of Earth is awake. And far above them, hidden in dimensions no human could yet name, others began to watch. Some curious. Some fearful. Some already calculating. The Earth had become more than a planet. It had become resonant. And the first true memory civilization in eons was about to rise.